My son sold their house and gave $620,000 for my daughter-in-law to spend. Then they came to live in my house. I said no. My daughter-in-law slapped me right across the face. That same day, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. When the papers arrived at their door, you should have seen the panic in her eyes. Hello everyone, please stay with me until the very end and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments. My name is Martha, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my own family would treat me this way. That cold January morning changed everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. I was baking cookies for the church fundraiser when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. The sound was harsh, angry. When I peeked through my kitchen window, I saw my son David walking toward my front door. His wife Rebecca was right behind him, but something was wrong. David's shoulders were slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. Rebecca looked perfectly put together as always, but her smile seemed fake. They had suitcases. Lots of them. My heart started beating faster. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron and opened the door before they could knock. "Mom," David said, and his voice cracked like he was about to cry. "We need your help." I looked at Rebecca, who was checking her phone, and seemed more interested in her manicured nails than talking to me. "What's happening?" I asked, stepping aside to let them in. They dragged their bags into my small living room. Rebecca immediately started looking around my house like she was judging everything. The way she wrinkled her nose at my old furniture made my stomach hurt. "Mom, we have something important to tell you," David said, sitting heavily on my couch. The same couch where he used to do his homework as a boy. Rebecca stood by the window, still on her phone, acting like this conversation didn't matter to her. I poured myself some coffee, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm listening, sweetheart," I said. David looked at Rebecca, and she gave him a tiny nod. "We sold the house," he said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You sold your house?" I asked. "The beautiful one on Oak Street?" The house I had helped them buy by giving them my entire life savings of $45,000 for the down payment. The house where I had spent every weekend for 2 years helping them paint, clean, and make it perfect. The house where I thought they would raise their children and be happy forever. "Why didn't you tell me you were thinking about selling?" I asked. Rebecca finally looked up from her phone. "We don't need permission from you, Martha. It's our house." Her voice was cold and mean. But I knew something was very wrong. That house was their dream home. "I understand it's your house," I said carefully, trying not to show how hurt I felt. "But we talked about your plans. You said you wanted to live there forever. You said it was perfect for the children you wanted to have." David wouldn't look at me. "Plans change, Mom." "How much did you sell it for?" I asked. $620,000, Rebecca said, and there was something almost excited in her voice, like she was bragging about winning a prize. My breath caught in my throat. That was more money than I had made in 15 years of working. "That's wonderful," I managed to say. "So, where are you moving? Did you find an even better house?" The silence that followed was scary. David stared at his hands. Rebecca went back to looking at her phone. "Actually, Mom," David finally said, "we were hoping we could stay here with you. Just for a little while until we figure things out." I blinked hard, sure I had heard wrong. "Stay here? In my house?" "It would just be temporary," he said quickly. "Maybe a few months. We wouldn't cause any trouble." "But what happened to all that money from selling your house?" I asked. Another terrible silence. "Well," Rebecca said, smoothing her expensive-looking dress, "I had some things I needed to buy." "What kind of things?" I asked. "Personal things," she said, like that was the end of the conversation. But I wasn't going to let it go that easily. "Rebecca, you just got over $500,000. What could you possibly have needed to buy?" "I bought some jewelry," she said, not looking sorry at all. "And some new clothes. I also got a new car. Oh, and I took a vacation to Europe with my friends. I also paid off some credit cards I had." I stared at her, waiting for her to tell me where the rest of the money went. When she didn't say anything more, I felt something cold and scary settle in my chest. "How much jewelry?" I asked quietly. Does it matter? Rebecca snapped. It was my money to spend however I wanted. Your money? The words came out before I could stop them. David finally looked up at me. Mom, please. We just need a place to stay while we get back on our feet. Get back on your feet? I repeated. David, you just had over $500,000. How are you not on your feet? It's complicated, he mumbled, like a little boy who had broken something and didn't want to admit it. I looked back and forth between my son and his wife, and for the first time, I really saw what was happening. David, my sweet boy who I had raised to be responsible and think before acting, was sitting in my living room with no home, even though he had just had more money than most people ever see. And Rebecca, who had never worked a day in her life, was sitting there in what looked like a brand new outfit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Where did all the money go, Rebecca? I asked again, and this time my voice was stronger. She rolled her eyes like I was bothering her with stupid questions. I told you, I had things to buy. $620,000 worth of things? It's not your business, Martha. Something inside me snapped. It became my business when you showed up at my door with suitcases asking for a place to live. David put his head in his hands. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. I stood up, forgetting about my coffee. David, help me understand this. You had a beautiful house, more money than most people dream of, and now you're asking to move in with your 67-year-old mother because your wife spent it all on jewelry and vacations. It wasn't just jewelry and vacations, Rebecca said, getting defensive. I had debts to pay off too. What debts? Credit card debts. How much? She glared at me with angry eyes. Enough. I felt like I was drowning. David, I said, looking straight at my son. Look at me. How much debt did she have? David raised his head, and I saw something in his eyes that broke my heart. He looked defeated, like he had given up fighting a long time ago. About $90,000, he said quietly. $90,000 in credit card debt. I felt dizzy. What did she buy with $90,000? Clothes mostly, he said, so quietly I could barely hear him. Shoes, purses, trips with her friends, and the rest of the money from the house. David looked at Rebecca, who was back to acting like this conversation didn't concern her. She wanted to help her family, he said. She bought her sister a new car, and she gave money to her parents for their house, and she invested in her cousin's business. What kind of business? I asked. A restaurant, Rebecca said, without looking up. It's going to make a lot of money. How much did you invest? $200,000. The number felt like a physical slap. $200,000 invested in a cousin's restaurant by a woman who had never run a business, never held a real job, never shown any interest in anything except spending money. So let me understand this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You sold your house for $620,000. $90,000 went to pay Rebecca's credit card bills. $200,000 went to invest in her cousin's restaurant. What happened to the rest? I told you, Rebecca said, finally looking up with irritation. I had expenses. The jewelry, the car, the vacation, furniture for my parents, gifts for my family. Things cost money. I did the math in my head. Even being generous with her spending, there should have been at least $100,000 left. Where's the rest of the money? I asked. There is no rest, Rebecca said coldly. It's gone. Gone. Over $600,000 gone in just a few months on jewelry, vacations, credit card bills, and a restaurant investment that I was sure would never make any money. I sat back down in my chair, feeling every one of my 67 years. This wasn't just about money. This was about my son, the values I had tried to teach him, and this woman who had somehow convinced him to throw it all away. So now you want to live here, I said. Just temporarily, David said again. I looked around my small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. I had worked for 40 years to pay off this house, to have a place that was mine, where I could live my retirement in peace. What's your plan? I asked. How do you plan to get back on your feet? David and Rebecca looked at each other. Well, Rebecca said, David will keep working, and I'm sure the restaurant will start making money soon. And if it doesn't? I asked. She shrugged like it didn't matter. Then we'll figure something else out. I stared at this woman who had convinced my son to sell his house and spend over $500,000 in a few months, and who was now sitting in my living room expecting me to take care of her. No, I said quietly. What? David looked up sharply. I said no. You can't stay here. The room became very quiet and cold. No, hung in the air like a challenge. I watched my son's face fall apart, but it was Rebecca's reaction that really scared me. Her perfectly calm mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something mean and calculating underneath. Mom, you can't be serious, David said, his voice getting louder. We're family. Yes, we are family, I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Which is why I'm not going to help you make this disaster even worse. Rebecca put her phone down on my coffee table with a loud bang. Help us make what worse, Martha? My husband made some business decisions. Not every investment pays off right away. Business decisions? I couldn't hide my shock. Spending $600,000 on jewelry, vacations, and your cousin's restaurant is not a business decision, Rebecca. It's crazy spending. How dare you judge how I spend my money? She screamed, her fake calm finally breaking. It wasn't your money, I said quietly. It was from a house that my son worked for that I helped buy. David stood up quickly and walked to my front window. Mom, we wouldn't ask if we had anywhere else to go. What about Rebecca's family? Her parents or her sister? Her parents live in a tiny apartment, David said. And her sister doesn't have room. The same sister she had bought a car for with his money. Rebecca's eyes were full of anger now. My family relationships are none of your concern. I stood up, finally out of patience. They became my concern the moment you showed up at my door asking for help. You spent my son's future on stupid things, and now you expect me to clean up your mess. It's not stupid, Rebecca shouted, jumping to her feet. You wouldn't understand. You've lived in this tiny house your whole life, wearing old clothes, driving an old car. You don't know what it's like to want nice things. The insult hurt, but I didn't let it show. No, Rebecca. I don't know what it's like to spend other people's money on expensive things and then expect them to give me a place to live when the money runs out. David turned from the window, his face red. Mom, please. I know Rebecca made some mistakes. Some mistakes. I interrupted. David, she spent over $600,000 in a few months. This isn't a mistake. This is a pattern. You don't know anything about our marriage, Rebecca hissed. I know what it's like to live within my means, I replied. I know what it's like to save for the things I want instead of expecting others to pay for them. Rebecca's face twisted with rage. Well, aren't you just perfect, Martha? The perfect mother who raised the perfect son who married the wrong woman. I never said that. You didn't have to. It's written all over your face every time you look at me. The truth was, she was right. I had never liked Rebecca from the moment David brought her home 2 years ago. But it wasn't because of where she came from or how she looked. It was because of moments like this, when her mask fell off and I could see the selfish, manipulative person underneath. Rebecca, I said carefully, I don't dislike you because of who you are. I dislike the choices you make and how they hurt my son. Your son is a grown man who makes his own choices, she shot back. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you make all the choices, and he just follows along. David finally spoke up, his voice tired. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? I turned to him. Tell me, David, whose idea was it to sell the house? He hesitated. We talked about it together. Whose idea was it to invest $200,000 in the restaurant? Another hesitation. Rebecca thought it was a good opportunity. Whose idea was it to spend $90,000 paying off credit card debts that you didn't even know existed? David's face turned red. Mom, please. Answer the question, David. Who's been making the financial decisions in your marriage? We make them together, he said weakly. Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound. Oh, please, David, tell your mother the truth. Tell her how you begged me to marry you. Tell her how grateful you were that someone like me would even look at someone like you. I felt my blood turn cold. Someone like you? Yes, Rebecca said, her voice dripping with meanness. Someone beautiful. Someone classy. Someone who could have had any man she wanted. Your son knows he got lucky when he married me. I looked at David, waiting for him to defend himself, to show some backbone. Instead, he stared at the floor. And now, Rebecca continued, when we need help, his own mother turns her back on us. What kind of mother does that? The kind who won't watch her son be destroyed by a woman who uses him, I said, my voice getting louder despite trying to stay calm. That's when Rebecca crossed the line. You bitter old woman, she screamed. You're just jealous because your son chose me over you. You can't stand that he loves me more than he loves his pathetic, lonely mother. Rebecca, stop, David said, but his voice had no strength. No, I won't stop. She needs to hear this. You're a miserable old lady living in a tiny house, jealous of everyone who has more than you do. I felt something break inside me. All the years of biting my tongue, of trying to be nice, of watching this woman slowly destroy my relationship with my son, it all came crashing down. Get out, I said quietly. What? I said get out of my house. Rebecca laughed. You can't throw us out. We have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. Mom, David begged, please think about this. We really don't have anywhere else. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and vacations. Rebecca stepped closer to me, her face twisted with fury. You don't get to talk to me like that in front of my husband. This is my house, I said firmly. I'll talk to you however I want, and right now I want you to leave. We're not going anywhere, Rebecca said, crossing her arms. David, tell your mother we're staying. I looked at my son, this man I had raised to stand up for what was right, to protect the people he loved. Instead, I saw a broken person who had let his wife walk all over him for so long that he didn't remember how to fight back. David, I said softly, please ask your wife to leave my home. He looked back and forth between us, his face showing his pain. Mom, please just let us stay for a few days while we figure something out.
No.
That's when Rebecca lost whatever control she had left. Fine, she screamed. You want to be selfish and heartless? Then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother you are. She stormed toward my front door and yanked it open so hard it hit the wall. My neighbors, Mrs. Chun from across the street and the Williams family from next door, were outside in their yards. They looked up at all the noise. You want to know what kind of woman Martha Stevens really is? Rebecca shouted, her voice carrying across the quiet street. She's throwing her own son out on the street, her own flesh and blood. I felt my cheeks burn with shame as neighbors stopped what they were doing to stare. Rebecca, please, David said, finally showing some backbone. But it was too late. No, she screamed. Let them all know. This woman raised a son who worked his whole life to buy a beautiful home. And when life got a little difficult, when we needed help, she slammed the door in our faces. Mrs. Chin took a step closer, clearly trying to hear every word. We asked for temporary help, Rebecca continued, with tears now streaming down her face, tears I was sure were completely fake. Just a place to stay while we got back on our feet. And this heartless woman said no to her own child. I stood in my doorway watching this performance, feeling more embarrassed than I had in years. My quiet street, where I had lived for 20 years, where my neighbors knew and respected me, was now the stage for this awful scene. That's enough, I said, stepping out onto my porch. No, it's not enough, Rebecca whirled around to face me. You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're just a selfish old woman who can't stand to see other people happy. Rebecca, stop this right now.
Why?
Because you're embarrassed? Good. You should be embarrassed. That's when she did something that changed everything. In front of my neighbors, in front of God, and everyone, Rebecca Stevens raised her hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed across the quiet street like a gunshot. I staggered back, my hand flying to my cheek, more from shock than pain. For a moment, nobody moved. Even Rebecca seemed surprised by what she had done. Mrs. Chen gasped loudly. The Williams' teenage daughter, who had been walking their dog, stopped and stared. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to show some outrage that his wife had just hit his mother. Instead, David stood there looking confused and overwhelmed. "Did you just hit me?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Rebecca lifted her chin like she was proud of what she had done. "You deserved it for throwing your own family out like trash." I looked around at my neighbors, all of them witnessing this humiliation. Mrs. Chen looked horrified. The Williams family was whispering to each other. Even the mail carrier had stopped his truck to watch. "David," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "your wife just hit me in front of the entire neighborhood." He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. "And you're going to stand there and let her?" "Mom, she's upset. She didn't mean to slap me in the face." Rebecca stepped between us. "Don't try to make this about you being a victim, Martha. You brought this on yourself." I stared at this woman who had just humiliated me in front of my neighbors, who had convinced my son to throw away his future, and who was now trying to make me the bad guy. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Make me," Rebecca sneered. I looked at my son one last time, hoping to see some sign that he would stand up to her, that he would choose right over wrong. Instead, I saw a man who had been so completely controlled that he couldn't even defend his own mother from being hit. "You have 5 minutes to get your bags and get off my property," I said. "If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare," Rebecca said, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. As the phone rang, I watched Rebecca's face change from defiance to panic. She grabbed David's arm. "Tell your mother to hang up that phone right now," she hissed. But I was already talking to the operator, giving my address, explaining that I needed an officer to help remove trespassers from my property who had become violent. When I hung up, Rebecca was staring at me in disbelief. "You actually called the police on your own son?" "No," I said calmly. "I called the police on the woman who just hit me in front of witnesses." For the first time since I had known her, Rebecca Stevens looked genuinely afraid. The police arrived within 15 minutes, though it felt like forever. Officer Johnson was a kind woman, maybe in her 30s, with professional manner that immediately made me feel better. Officer Davis, her partner, was older, probably close to my age, with gray hair and the tired look of someone who had seen too much family drama over the years. By the time they arrived, Rebecca had managed to pull herself together somewhat. She had stopped crying and fixed her hair, but I could still see the panic in her eyes. David stood beside their luggage, looking like a lost child. "Ma'am," Officer Johnson said, approaching me first, "we received a call about an assault." "Yes," I said, pointing to my still stinging cheek. "This woman slapped me." Officer Davis looked at Rebecca. "Is this true, ma'am?" "She was being unreasonable," Rebecca said, as if that made hitting someone okay. "We just needed a place to stay temporarily, and she threw us out like we were strangers." "That doesn't give you the right to hit anyone," Officer Johnson said firmly. "Ma'am," she turned back to me, "do you want to press charges?" I looked at my son, standing there with his head down, saying nothing to defend me. This man I had raised, sacrificed for, loved without condition, and he couldn't even say his wife was wrong for hitting his mother. "Yes," I said quietly, "I want to press charges." Rebecca's face went white. "You can't be serious." "Assault is a serious charge, ma'am," Officer Davis said. "We have multiple witnesses who saw you strike Mrs. Stevens." Indeed, my neighbors were still standing in their yards watching the drama unfold. Mrs. Chen nodded strongly when Officer Johnson looked in her direction. "I saw the whole thing," Mrs. Chen called out. "She hit Martha right across the face for no reason." "This is ridiculous," Rebecca protested. "She's my mother-in-law. This is a family dispute." "Family or not," Officer Johnson said, "assault is assault. You'll need to come with us." As they led Rebecca toward the police car, she turned back to David. "Don't just stand there. Do something." But David seemed frozen, watching his wife being arrested on his mother's front lawn. He looked at me with something that might have been blame. Mom, did you really have to? Yes, I said before he could finish. I really had to. Your wife hit me in front of the entire neighborhood, and you stood there and did nothing. She's my wife, and I'm your mother, but apparently that doesn't mean anything anymore. Officer Davis approached with a clipboard. Mrs. Stevens, we'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement. Can you do that this afternoon? Of course. As the police car pulled away with Rebecca in the back seat, David loaded his luggage back into his car. He moved slowly, like a man in shock. Where will you go? I asked, despite everything. He shrugged. I don't know. Maybe a hotel for tonight. With what money? The question hung in the air between us. We both knew he couldn't afford a hotel for very long. We both knew this was just the beginning of his problems. David, I said softly, this doesn't have to be the end. If you leave her, if you admit that this whole situation is wrong, we can work through this. He looked at me with tired eyes. She's my wife, Mom. I can't just abandon her. She abandoned you the moment she spent your future on jewelry and vacations. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple. He climbed into his car without another word and drove away, leaving me standing on my front porch, feeling more alone than I had since my husband died 5 years ago. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I gave my statement at the police station, detailing not just the assault but the entire confrontation. The officer taking my statement, Detective Martinez, was thorough and professional. Mrs. Stevens, she said when we were finished, I have to ask, is this the first time your daughter-in-law has been physically aggressive with you? I considered the question. Yes, physically, but she's been emotionally manipulative for years. Can you elaborate on that? I told her about how Rebecca had gradually separated David from me, how she always seemed to schedule their visits during times she knew I couldn't make it, how she had slowly turned my son against me, making him believe his mother was too controlling. And the financial situation? Detective Martinez asked. You mentioned that they sold their house and spent the money, over $600,000? All gone in a matter of months, I said. She has expensive tastes and no understanding of living within her means. Detective Martinez whistled softly. That's a lot of money to go through that quickly. She spent it on jewelry, vacations, credit card bills, and a restaurant investment that I doubt will ever make any money. And your son went along with this? I sighed. My son has been completely manipulated by this woman. He can't see what she's doing to him, to his future, to our family. That evening, alone in my house, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and really thought about my situation for the first time. Pressing charges against Rebecca was just the beginning. She would be back. They would both be back. And next time they might not be so direct about what they wanted. I thought about the house on Oak Street, the one I had helped them buy. $45,000 from my life savings. Money I had worked decades to save. Money that had essentially been thrown away along with the rest of their house money. But then I remembered something. When they had bought the house, there had been paperwork. Lots of paperwork. And because I had given them such a large amount of money for the down payment, the real estate lawyer had insisted on certain protections. I went to my file cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled David House Purchase. Inside were copies of all the documents from the sale, including something I had almost forgotten about, a promissory note. The lawyer had insisted on it when I had given them the $45,000. Mrs. Stevens, he had said at the time, I strongly recommend that this be structured as a loan rather than a gift. It protects your interests and ensures that your son understands the seriousness of accepting such a large sum. At the time, I had protested. I didn't want to make it a loan. I wanted to help my son. But David himself had insisted. Mom, I want to pay you back. This should be official. The promissory note was very clear. $45,000 to be repaid at 4% annual interest, with payments beginning 1 year after the house purchase date. The loan was secured by the property itself, meaning I had a legal interest in the house. But they had sold the house without paying me back, without even mentioning the outstanding loan. I picked up my phone and called a number for Robert Mitchell, the lawyer who had handled the original purchase. His secretary told me he could see me the next morning. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about David as a little boy, how he used to run to me when he was scared, how proud he had been when he graduated from college, how he had promised at his father's funeral that he would always take care of me. Where had that boy gone? How had he become this man who stood silent while his wife hid his mother? The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best dress and drove to Robert Mitchell's office. He was a distinguished man in his 70s with white hair and the kind of presence that made you feel confident. "Mrs. Stevens," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "I was sorry to hear about your troubles. Please sit down and tell me what's happened." I explained the entire situation: the house sale, the wasted money, the assault, the arrest. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Martha," he said, "do you understand that you have significant legal options here?" "What do you mean?" "The promissory note securing your $45,000 loan was recorded as a lien against the property. When your son sold the house without paying off that debt, he violated the terms of the note. You have grounds for both breach of contract and conversion." I felt a flutter of something in my chest, not quite hope, but something stronger than resignation. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means you can sue for the full amount of the loan, plus interest plus damages. And because the debt was secured by real property, you may be able to attach other assets to satisfy the judgment." "What other assets?" Robert smiled grimly. "Well, let's see what your son and daughter-in-law have left after their spending spree." Over the next hour, Robert explained my options in detail. I could file a civil lawsuit seeking repayment of the loan, plus interest and damages. I could also pursue criminal charges for theft by conversion, since they had sold property that was partially mine without my consent. "But Robert," I said, "I don't want to destroy my son's life. I just want him to understand that actions have consequences." "Sometimes, Martha, the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices." I thought about that as I drove home. Was I protecting David by allowing Rebecca to manipulate him? Was I enabling his poor decisions by always being there to catch him when he fell? By the time I got home, I had made my decision. I called Robert Mitchell and told him to file the lawsuit, not just against Rebecca, but against both of them. They were married. They had made the decision together to sell the house, and they would face the consequences together. Then I did something else. I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. I installed a security system with cameras that would record anyone who came near my property. I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. That afternoon, David called. "Mom, Rebecca made bail. We need to talk." "No, we don't," I said firmly. "Mom, please. She's sorry about hitting you. She was just upset." "David, your wife stole $45,000 from me and then hit me when I refused to let you both live here after you wasted over $500,000. There's nothing to talk about." "What do you mean stole $45,000? I explained about the promissory note, about the lien on the house, about the lawsuit I had filed that morning. The silence on the other end of the phone went on so long, I thought he might have hung up. "Mom," he finally said, his voice shaking, "you can't sue us. We're family." "You're right, David. We are family, which is why what you did hurt so much more than if a stranger had stolen from me. We didn't steal from you. You sold a house that had a $45,000 lien on it without paying me back. What would you call that?" Another long silence. "How much are you suing for?" $45,000 plus 2 years of interest plus legal fees plus damages for conversion and breach of contract. My lawyer estimates the total at around $70,000. We don't have $70,000. You should have thought of that before you let your wife spend your entire future on jewelry and vacations.
"Mom, please."
Can't we work something out? Maybe we can pay you back slowly over time. You mean like the original promissory note said? The one you ignored for 2 years before selling the house. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the phone. "Where are you staying?" I asked. "A cheap motel. The cheapest one we could find." "How long can you afford to stay there?" "Maybe a week. 2 weeks if we're very careful. And then what? I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. For a moment, I almost gave in. This was my son, my baby, and he sounded so lost and scared. But then I remembered Rebecca's hand hitting my face, and my resolve got stronger. David, I love you. I have always loved you, and I always will. But I will not be manipulated, stolen from, or hit. If you want a relationship with me, you need to take responsibility for your choices and what happens because of them. What does that mean? It means you need to decide what's more important to you, your relationship with your wife or your relationship with your mother, because right now you can't have both. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking as I set the phone down. Outside, the sun was setting over my quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Chun was watering her flowers, and the Williams kids were playing in their driveway. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but I knew that nothing would ever be normal again. Tomorrow, David and Rebecca would get the legal papers. They would realize that their actions had real consequences, and I would find out once and for all whether the son I had raised still existed somewhere inside the man Rebecca had created. 3 days after I filed the lawsuit, Robert Mitchell called me with news that made my heart sink. "Martha, I need you to sit down," he said. "My investigator has been looking into your daughter-in-law's background, and we've found some things you need to know." I was already sitting at my kitchen table, but I held the phone tighter. "What kind of things?" "Rebecca has done this before. Before she married your son, she was engaged to another man. The relationship ended when he discovered she had been using his credit cards without permission. In that case, she ran up over $60,000 in debt before the man found out." My heart sank further. "Does David know this?" "I don't think so. She's very good at hiding her past. But there's more. The restaurant she invested in, it doesn't exist. My investigator couldn't find any business license, any location, any evidence that this restaurant is anything more than a way for her cousin to get $200,000 for free." I felt sick to my stomach. "So the money is just gone?" "It appears so. And Martha, there's something else, something worse." I prepare myself for more bad news. She's been having an affair for at least 4 months, possibly longer. The man is married and wealthy, and she's been using your son's money to fund their relationship. The expensive jewelry, the vacations, the new car, it was all part of keeping this other man interested in her. The room started spinning around me. I gripped the edge of the table to keep steady. My son, my decent, hardworking son, had been completely destroyed by a woman who was using him like an ATM while cheating on him with someone else. "Does my son know about the affair?" I asked. "I don't believe so. But Martha, the man she's been seeing is ending the relationship." My investigator spoke to his wife, who found out about the affair and threatened to divorce him unless he stopped seeing Rebecca. That's why Rebecca is suddenly desperate for money and a place to stay. Her wealthy boyfriend cut her off. I closed my eyes, trying to process all this information. Everything made sense now. The sudden need to sell the house, the crazy spending spree, the desperation when I refused to let them stay with me. Rebecca wasn't just irresponsible with money. She was a predator who had systematically destroyed my son's life to fund her affair. "What do we do with this information?" I asked. "We use it. In the lawsuit, we can argue that the money was obtained through fraud and lies. We can also use it to make sure your son understands exactly who he married." That afternoon, the process server delivered the legal papers to the motel where David and Rebecca were staying. I knew because David called me 30 minutes later, his voice shaking with anger. "Mom, what is this?" "It's a lawsuit, David. I told you I was going to file it." $72,000? You're suing us for $72,000. That's what you owe me, plus interest, plus legal fees, plus damages. We don't have $72,000. I know. That's what happens when you steal from family to pay for a lifestyle you can't afford. I could hear Rebecca in the background, screaming something I couldn't understand. "She wants to know if you've lost your mind," David said. "Tell your wife that I'm completely sane. I'm also completely done being stolen from and hit."
Mom, please.
"Can't we work something out?" "No, David. The time for working things out was 2 years ago, when you first missed a payment on the promissory note. Or it was 6 months ago when you decided to sell the house. Or it was last week when you showed up at my door asking for help after wasting over $500,000. What do you want us to do? We're living in a motel room. I want you to get jobs and start taking responsibility for the mess you've made. Rebecca can't work. She's never had a job. Then it's time for her to learn. Mom, you don't understand. She's not capable of working some regular job. She's what, David? Too good to work? Too special to earn her own money. The silence stretched between us. Finally, David spoke, his voice quieter now. She says she'll countersue for emotional distress or something. I almost laughed. Let her try. I have witnesses to her hitting me, and I have documentation of every dollar she stole. What does she have? More screaming in the background. Then David came back on the line. She wants to know why you're doing this to us. Because you both need to learn that actions have consequences. And David, there's something else you need to know about your wife. What? I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. The moment when I would either save my son or lose him forever. She's been having an affair. The silence that followed was complete. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. What did you say? Rebecca has been having an affair for at least 4 months. The man is wealthy and married. She's been using her money to fund their relationship. That's not true. It is true. My lawyer hired an investigator. We have proof. You hired an investigator to spy on my wife? I hired an investigator to find out where $600,000 went. The affair was just what we discovered in the process. More silence. Then, in the background, I heard Rebecca's voice clearly for the first time. What is she saying? What lies is she telling you about me? She says you're having an affair, David said, his voice hollow. The explosion that followed was loud enough to hear clearly through the phone. Rebecca screamed denials, accusations, threats. She called me every name she could think of, and some I had never heard before. David, I said quietly, ask her about Michael Harrison. The screaming stopped suddenly. Who is Michael Harrison? David asked. Ask your wife. I heard muffled conversation. Then David came back on the line. She says she doesn't know anyone by that name. He's 48 years old, owns a chain of restaurants, drives a silver BMW. He's been paying for her jewelry and vacations for months. His wife found out about the affair 2 weeks ago and made him end it. The phone went quiet again. This time the silence lasted almost a full minute. David, are you there? How do you know all this? Because I hired professionals to find out where your money went. And what we discovered is that your wife has been systematically destroying your life to fund an affair with a married man who just dumped her. She's saying it's not true. Of course she is. What did you expect her to say? She's crying now. She's manipulating you again. Mom, I can't. I need to think. Think about this, David. Think about how she convinced you to sell your house without discussing it with me first, even though I had a legal interest in the property. Think about how she spent $600,000 in a few months while you were at work, trusting her to make good decisions. Think about how she hit your mother in front of the entire neighborhood and then expected you to defend her. I'm hanging up now, David. Wait. But the line went dead. I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, wondering if I had just saved my son or lost him forever. Either way, I had told him the truth. What he did with that information was up to him. The next morning, Robert Mitchell called again. Martha, I have an update. Your son called my office this morning. He wants to meet. Meet about what? He didn't say specifically, but he sounded different. Defeated maybe, or awakened. It's hard to tell. We arranged to meet at Robert's office that afternoon. I arrived early, nervous about seeing David again. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He had always been thin, but now he looked gaunt. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look 10 years older. Hello, Mom, he said quietly, taking the chair across from me. Hello, David. Robert sat behind his desk, legal pad ready. David, you said you wanted to discuss the lawsuit. I want to know exactly what my wife has done, David said. I want to see all the evidence. For the next hour, Robert laid out everything his investigator had discovered. The affair with Michael Harrison, documented through hotel receipts and credit card statements. The fake restaurant investment that was nothing more than a way to funnel money to Rebecca's cousin. The pattern of financial lies with her previous boyfriend. The mounting credit card debt that David hadn't known about. With each revelation, I watched my son shrink further into his chair. By the time Robert finished, David was staring at his hands, silent tears streaming down his face. Where is she now? I asked gently. At the motel. She doesn't know I'm here. What are you going to do? David looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. My whole life, everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my wife, it's all been a lie. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I truly am. She's been stealing from me for years. Not just spending money, actively lying to me, cheating on me. And when you tried to warn me, I chose her over you. You were manipulated by someone who's very good at manipulation. It's not your fault, isn't it? I'm 32 years old, Mom. I should have seen the signs. I should have questioned why she never wanted to work, why she always needed more money, why she was so eager to sell the house. Robert cleared his throat. David, the question now is what you want to do about the lawsuit. Your mother is entitled to the money you owe her, but we could potentially work out a payment plan if... No, David interrupted. She deserves to be paid back immediately. All of it. Son, you just said you don't have the money. I'll get it. I'll take out a loan, work extra hours, sell whatever I need to sell. Mom, you've been trying to protect me my whole life, and I repaid you by letting my wife steal from you and hit you. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I won't fight the lawsuit. You deserve every penny. I felt my own eyes filling with tears. And, Mom, I want you to know that I'm filing for divorce today. I can't stay married to someone who's been lying to me about everything. The relief I felt was overwhelming. What about Rebecca? What will she do? David's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. That's not my problem anymore. She's an adult who made her own choices. Let her figure out how to live with what happens next. As we left Robert's office, David and I walked to our cars together. At my car, he stopped and turned to me. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you in ways that might not be fixable, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. I reached out and touched his cheek the way I used to when he was little and needed comfort. You already are making it right, sweetheart. You already are. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, hope. Not just hope that I would get my money back, but hope that I had gotten my son back too. But I also knew that Rebecca wouldn't go quietly. A woman who had spent years lying and manipulating wouldn't just accept defeat. She would fight back, and when she did, it would probably get very ugly. I was right to be worried. The real battle was just beginning. I should have known Rebecca wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. 2 days after David filed for divorce, she showed up at my house at 7 in the morning, pounding on my door like a crazy person. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing on my porch in wrinkled clothes, her hair messy, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Martha, she screamed loud enough to wake the entire neighborhood. I know you're in there. Open this door right now. I didn't move. My new security system was recording everything, and I had no intention of letting her into my house. You destroyed my marriage, she continued screaming. You turned my husband against me with your lies. Mrs. Chen's porch light came on across the street. The Williams dog started barking. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police again if necessary. I'm not leaving until you talk to me, Rebecca shrieked. You owe me that much. I pressed the intercom button on my security system. Rebecca, you need to leave my property immediately, or I'm calling the police. Good.
Call them.
Let them hear how you destroyed an innocent woman's life. Innocent. The word would have been funny if the situation weren't so pathetic. You have 30 seconds to get off my property, I said through the intercom.
No.
I'm not going anywhere until you admit what you've done. I dialed 911 and gave them my address. This is Martha Stevens on Pine Street. The woman who hit me last week is back on my property, refusing to leave and causing a disturbance. The operator assured me officers were on their way. Rebecca must have heard me talking because her pounding became more frantic. You can't hide behind the police forever, Martha. Everyone needs to know what kind of person you really are. Then she did something that shocked even me. She started screaming details about our family situation for the entire neighborhood to hear. This woman turned her own son against his wife. She yelled at the top of her lungs. She hired private investigators to spy on us. She's trying to steal our money. I watched through my window as more neighbors came outside to see what was happening. Some were recording with their phones. This was exactly what Rebecca wanted, to embarrass me publicly, to make me look like the villain in her twisted story. She's jealous because her son loves me more than her. Rebecca continued. She can't stand that he chose me, so she's trying to destroy our marriage. The police arrived just as Rebecca was starting to give more details about our financial situation for the entertainment of anyone within 6 blocks. Officer Johnson was back, along with a male officer I didn't recognize. Ma'am, Officer Johnson said firmly, you need to calm down and step away from the door. I'm not doing anything wrong, Rebecca protested. I'm trying to talk to my mother-in-law. Mrs. Stevens has asked you to leave her property. You need to comply. She's destroying my family. She hired investigators to spy on me and my husband. The new officer, whose name tag read Wilson, stepped forward. Ma'am, what Mrs. Stevens does with her own money is not your concern. This is her property, and she has the right to ask you to leave. But she's lying about me. She's telling people I'm having an affair. Officer Johnson looked at her notepad. Ma'am, are you Rebecca Stevens, the woman who was arrested here last week for assault? It wasn't assault. It was barely a tap. You slapped Mrs. Stevens in the face in front of multiple witnesses. That's assault. I watched from my window as Rebecca's composure completely fell apart. She fell to her knees on my porch, sobbing dramatically. Please, she begged, looking directly at my front door. Please, Martha. I have nowhere to go. David kicked me out of the motel. He's filing for divorce. I don't have any money. Please don't do this to me. For just a moment, I felt a small bit of sympathy. Then I remembered the $600,000, the affair with Michael Harrison, the fake restaurant investment, and my resolve got stronger. Officer Wilson helped Rebecca to her feet. Ma'am, you need to find somewhere else to go. If you come back here, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Where am I supposed to go? She wailed. I don't have anywhere. That's not Mrs. Stevens' problem, Officer Johnson said firmly. You have 5 minutes to get in your car and leave, or we're taking you in. After the police left with Rebecca, I called David. He answered on the first ring. Mom, I heard.
I'm so sorry.
I told her to stay away from you. Where's she staying? I don't know. After I filed for divorce yesterday, I told her she had to leave the motel. I couldn't afford to keep paying for both of us to stay there. And you have no idea where she went. She mentioned maybe staying with her cousin, the one with a fake restaurant, but honestly, Mom, I don't care. I'm done being responsible for her problems. I felt a surge of pride hearing the strength in my son's voice. This was the David I had raised, the one who took responsibility for his actions and didn't make excuses for bad behavior. How are you managing? I asked. I'm staying at a weekly motel across town. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and I can afford it while I figure out my next steps. I've been working overtime, trying to save up money to pay you back. David, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Mom, I let my wife steal from you, and then stood by while she hit you. I need to make this right. That afternoon, Robert Mitchell called with an update. Martha, we have a problem. Rebecca has hired a lawyer. I thought she didn't have any money. She doesn't. But apparently she's found a lawyer willing to work for free, hoping to get paid later. They're claiming that your lawsuit is harassment and that you're using the legal system to interfere in their marriage. I felt my blood pressure rise. That's ridiculous. I know it is, but we need to be prepared for a fight. They're also claiming that the promissory note was invalid because your family and there was no real intention to collect on the debt. There was absolutely an intention to collect. That's why we made it official. I know that, and we can prove it. But Rebecca's lawyer is good at making bad cases sound reasonable. We need to document everything, every interaction you've had with them, every payment that was missed, every attempt you made to work with them before filing suit. Over the next week, I put together everything I could think of. Phone records showing how many times I had called David about missed payments, only to have Rebecca answer and make excuses. Emails I had sent asking about their financial situation. Receipts showing money I had lent them over the years for various emergencies that were never paid back. The picture that emerged was clear. I hadn't been a vindictive mother-in-law trying to destroy their marriage. I had been a concerned parent trying to help my son, only to be systematically lied to and stolen from. But Rebecca wasn't finished. 2 days before our court date, she showed up at my workplace. I worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a small tax office, a job I had taken after retirement to stay busy and add to my Social Security. I was at my desk working on quarterly reports when the receptionist called back to tell me I had a visitor. She says she's your daughter-in-law, Susan said. Should I send her back? My heart sank. No. Tell her I'm busy and can't see visitors during work hours. A few minutes later, Susan called again. She's not leaving. She says she'll wait all day if she has to. She's making other clients uncomfortable. I sighed and walked to the front office. Rebecca was sitting in the waiting area, dressed in her most expensive outfit, looking like she was ready for a business meeting rather than whatever confrontation she had planned. Rebecca, you need to leave. This is my workplace. I just want to talk, she said loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I could see my coworkers watching from their desks, curious about the drama unfolding in our usually quiet office. We have nothing to discuss. Please, Martha. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you and David, but I'm trying to make it right. The sincerity in her voice was so convincing that for a moment I almost believed her. Then I remembered that this was the same woman who had looked me in the eye and lied about affairs, spending money, and a dozen other things. What do you want, Rebecca? I want to settle the lawsuit. I want to make things right between us.
Fine.
Pay me the $72,000 you owe me, and I'll drop the suit. You know I don't have that kind of money. Then we have nothing to discuss. She stood up, moving closer to me. Martha, please. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to have my life destroyed over them. You destroyed your own life when you decided to steal from family and cheat on your husband. The mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the real Rebecca underneath, cold, calculating, dangerous. Fine, she said quietly. If that's how you want to play it, then that's how we'll play it. But don't think this is over. What kind of things? She smiled, a cruel expression that made my skin crawl. Let's just say David hasn't been completely honest with you about everything. Before I could ask what she meant, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of dread. That evening, I called David and told him about Rebecca's visit. She said she knows things about you that would surprise me. What did she mean? David was quiet for a long moment. Mom, there are some things I never told you, things I'm not proud of. My heart sank. What kind of things? When Rebecca and I were first married, I did some things, some financial things that weren't completely legal. What do you mean? I lied on some loan applications to get better rates. I also didn't report some cash income on our taxes 1 year. And when we bought the house, I may have inflated my income on the mortgage application. I felt sick. David, why didn't you tell me this? Because I was ashamed. And because Rebecca said it was normal that everyone did things like that. And she is proof of this. She kept copies of everything. She said it was for our records, but now I think she was keeping it as insurance in case I ever tried to leave her. I closed my eyes, understanding the full scope of what we were dealing with. Rebecca wasn't just a manipulative spender. She was a criminal who had been systematically compromising my son for years, creating evidence she could use to destroy him if he ever tried to escape. David, you need to tell Robert Mitchell about this immediately. Mom, if this comes out, I could go to jail. I could lose my job, my professional license, everything. And if you don't tell him and Rebecca uses it against us in court, You'll lose everything anyway. At least this way we can try to control how it comes out. The next morning, I sat in Robert Mitchell's office with my son as he confessed to his financial crimes. Robert listened without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When David finished, Robert leaned back in his chair and studied us both. "This is serious," he said finally, "but it's not the end of the world. The statute of limitations has passed on some of these issues, and the others can potentially be resolved through voluntary disclosure and payment of penalties." "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "The lawsuit just got more complicated. But Martha, I want you to understand something. Your daughter-in-law isn't just trying to avoid paying you back. She's trying to destroy your son's life as punishment for leaving her. This isn't about money anymore. This is about control." As we left Robert's office, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. Rebecca had shown her true colors, and she was willing to destroy everyone around her rather than accept responsibility for her actions. But I wasn't the same woman who had opened her door to them a month ago. I was stronger now, angrier, and absolutely determined to protect my son from the monster he had married. The war was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like we might actually win. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, with old wooden benches and bright lights that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat behind Robert Mitchell's table, my hands folded in my lap, watching as Rebecca entered with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who looked like she charged a lot of money. Rebecca had clearly spent money she didn't have on her appearance for court. Her hair was freshly done, her makeup perfect, and she wore a conservative navy dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She was playing the role of the wrong daughter-in-law, the victim of a vindictive mother-in-law's harassment. David sat beside me, looking nervous but determined. Over the past week, he had worked with Robert to voluntarily report his financial irregularities to the appropriate authorities. It would mean paying penalties and potentially losing his current job, but it also meant Rebecca couldn't use the information to destroy him. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Margaret Foster entered. She was a woman in her 50s with brown hair and the kind of stern expression that suggested she had heard every sob story in the book. Rebecca's lawyer, Ms. Jennifer Park, went first. She painted a picture of a young woman trapped in an impossible situation, victimized by a mother-in-law who had never accepted her and was now using the legal system to interfere in their marriage. "Your Honor," Ms. Park said in a voice dripping with sympathy, "my client made some poor financial decisions, as many young people do, but Mrs. Stevens' response has been excessive and vindictive. She hired private investigators to spy on my client, encouraged her son to file for divorce, and is now trying to extract money from a woman who has no means to pay." She made Rebecca sound like an innocent victim who had maybe spent a little too much money on clothes, rather than a woman who had systematically stolen over $600,000 while conducting an affair. When it was Robert's turn, he methodically laid out the facts. The $45,000 loan documented in a legally binding promissory note. The 2 years of missed payments despite repeated attempts to collect. The sale of the house without satisfying a lien. The assault that had been witnessed by multiple neighbors. "Your Honor," Robert said, "this is not a case of a vindictive mother-in-law harassing her daughter-in-law. This is a case of a woman who has been systematically defrauded by someone who viewed her as an easy target." Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He called Michael Harrison as a witness. I turned to see a middle-aged man in an expensive suit entering the courtroom, his face grim. He looked like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. Under oath, Michael confirmed the affair. He testified that Rebecca had told him she was getting divorced, that she had money from her family, and that she needed help maintaining her lifestyle during the separation. He had paid for jewelry, vacations, and expensive dinners, believing she was a wealthy woman going through a difficult divorce. She told me her husband was controlling and that his mother was trying to steal her inheritance. Michael testified, not looking at Rebecca. She said she needed money to fight them in court. Rebecca's face had gone completely white. Her lawyer was frantically writing notes, clearly not having expected this testimony. "Did you know that Mrs. Rebecca Stevens was using money from the sale of her marital home to fund your relationship?" Robert asked. "No, I did not. If I had known, I never would have participated. And when did this relationship end? 3 weeks ago. My wife discovered the affair and threatened to leave me if I didn't end it immediately. When Robert finished with Michael, Miss Park tried to minimize the damage. She argued that the affair was irrelevant to the financial dispute, that whatever mistakes Rebecca had made in her personal life didn't change the fact that the lawsuit was excessive. But Judge Foster looked unimpressed. When Miss Park sat down, the judge leaned forward and studied the paperwork in front of her. "Miss Stevens," she said, addressing Rebecca directly, "do you dispute that you signed the promissory note agreeing to repay Mrs. Stevens $45,000? No, Your Honor, but do you dispute that you failed to make any payments on this note for 2 years? The circumstances were, do you dispute that you and your husband sold the house that secured this loan without paying off the debt?" Rebecca's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client was not personally responsible for—" "Sit down, counselor. I'm asking your client direct questions." Rebecca looked like she was about to cry. "Your Honor, I didn't understand the legal implications." "Mrs. Stevens, you're 29 years old. Are you claiming you didn't understand that borrowing money meant you had to pay it back? It wasn't supposed to be a real loan. It was family money." Judge Foster's expression grew even sterner. "Mrs. Stevens, do you see your signature on this promissory note?" "Yes, but did anyone force you to sign it?" "No, but then it's a real loan, regardless of your family relationship." The judge then turned her attention to the assault charge. She had Mrs. Chun testify about what she had witnessed and the police officers who had responded to the call. When Ms. Park tried to argue that it was just a family dispute that got out of hand, Judge Foster cut her off. "Counselor, assault is assault. The relationship between the parties is irrelevant." Finally, Robert presented evidence of Rebecca's spending patterns, the jewelry purchases, the vacations, the fake restaurant investment. He showed how over $600,000 had been spent in less than 6 months with no assets to show for it. "Your Honor," Robert said, "this isn't a case of poor financial management. This is a case of systematic fraud. Mrs. Rebecca Stevens used her husband's money to fund an extramarital affair while deliberately avoiding her legal obligations to my client." When both sides had presented their cases, Judge Foster called a brief recess. I went to the restroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to process everything I had heard. The full scope of Rebecca's lies was even worse than I had imagined. When court resumed, Judge Foster had clearly made her decision. "Mrs. Rebecca Stevens," she began, "I have rarely seen such a clear-cut case of financial fraud and manipulation. You borrowed $45,000 from your husband's mother, agreed to specific repayment terms, then spent 2 years avoiding your obligations while spending over $600,000 on personal luxuries and an extramarital affair." Rebecca started crying, but Judge Foster wasn't finished. "When confronted about your behavior, you physically assaulted the woman you had stolen from and attempted to manipulate the legal system to avoid the consequences of your actions." She turned to her paperwork. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Rebecca Stevens, you are ordered to pay Mrs. Martha Stevens the full amount of $72,000 within 30 days. If you fail to comply, I will authorize wage garnishment and asset seizure." Rebecca's sobbing grew louder. Furthermore, Judge Foster continued, "I am forwarding this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal fraud charges. The systematic deception and theft demonstrated in this case goes far beyond a civil matter." Ms. Park stood up quickly. "Your Honor, my client has no assets with which to pay this judgment." "Then your client should have thought about that before spending over $600,000 on jewelry and vacations. This court will not reward financial fraud with sympathy." As we left the courthouse, Rebecca was still crying in the hallway, her lawyer trying to calm her down. She looked at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed as I walked past. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." I stopped and looked at her for what I knew would be the last time. "Yes, Rebecca," I said quietly, "it is over. It's been over since the moment you raised your hand to me." For months later, I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset over my garden when David called. "Mom, I have news." Rebecca's cousin, the one with a fake restaurant, was arrested today for fraud. Apparently, Rebecca wasn't her only victim. She'd been running investment scams for years. Will that help you get any of the money back? Probably not. The money's gone. But it means Rebecca might be facing criminal charges too, if they can prove she knew it was a scam. And how are you doing?
Better.
I found a new job. It pays less than my old one, but it's honest work, and they knew about my legal issues when they hired me. I'm in a small apartment now. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Are you happy? There was a long pause. You know what, Mom? I think I am. For the first time in years, I wake up in the morning and don't have to wonder what financial disaster is waiting for me. I know exactly how much money I have, exactly what I owe, exactly what I can afford. It's liberating. What about the $72,000 you owe me? I've been making payments every month, just like I promised. It'll take me a few years, but I'll pay back every penny. David, you don't have to? Yes, I do. It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about showing you that I'm the man you raised me to be. After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about the past few months. I had gotten my money back. Well, most of it. More importantly, I had gotten my son back. Rebecca was facing criminal charges in 2 different states. Michael Harrison's wife had filed for divorce and was seeking half of everything he owned. The fake restaurant investigation had expanded into a multi-state fraud case. Everyone who had participated in the lies was facing consequences. While I was sitting peacefully in my garden, surrounded by the life I had built through honest work and careful saving, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost didn't read it, but something made me look. I know where you live. This isn't over. I looked at the message for a long moment, then blocked the number and deleted the text. Rebecca could threaten me all she wanted from whatever jail cell or courtroom she was facing. I had cameras. I had security. I had the law on my side, and I had the unshakable knowledge that I had done the right thing. A year later, I sold my house and moved to a retirement community in Florida. It was warm and peaceful, with a garden club and a book club, and neighbors who had lived full lives and appreciated simple pleasures. I bought a small condo with a view of the ocean and spent my mornings tending to my new garden and my afternoons reading by the pool. David visited every few months, flying down from Atlanta, where he had found steady work and genuine friends. He never mentioned Rebecca, and I never asked. Some chapters in life need to be closed completely before new ones can begin. One evening, as I was watering my tomatoes, my neighbor Carol called over the fence. Martha, there's someone at your door. A young woman. She looks upset. My heart skipped a beat, but when I walked around to the front of my condo, I saw it wasn't Rebecca. It was a woman in her 20s with red hair and tired eyes. Mrs. Stevens? My name is Angela. I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you about Rebecca. I studied her face, seeing something familiar in her features. How do you know Rebecca? She's my sister, and she's been doing to other families what she did to yours. We sat on my small patio as Angela told me her story. Rebecca had moved to Texas after the criminal charges in Florida, using a different name and a carefully crafted sob story about being victimized by her ex-husband's family. She was engaged to another wealthy man, spinning the same lies about needing money to fight false accusations. I've been trying to warn people, Angela said, but she's very convincing. She makes everyone believe she's the victim. What do you want from me?
Help.
You're the only person who's ever successfully stood up to her and won. I need to know how you did it. I made us both iced tea and told Angela everything. The investigation, the lawsuit, the importance of documenting everything and never backing down. The key, I said finally, is understanding that you can't save someone from their own choices. You can only protect yourself and the people you care about. Angela stayed for dinner, and we talked until late in the evening about family manipulation and the courage it takes to do the right thing when the right thing is hard. After she left, I sat on my patio looking up at the Florida stars, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I had thought my life was simple and settled. I had had no idea that my greatest challenge and my greatest victory were still ahead of me. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight, fought against people you never wanted to hurt, in defense of principles you never thought you would have to defend. But when those battles come, you have two choices: fight or surrender everything you've worked for to people who see your kindness as weakness. I chose to fight. And in fighting, I discovered that at 67 years old, I was stronger than I had ever imagined. The roses in my garden were blooming beautifully, their petals soft and fragrant in the ocean breeze. Like me, they had survived being transplanted and were thriving in new soil. Some things, I realized, grow stronger when they're forced to put down new roots. Now, I'm curious about you who are listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're here, I'm leaving 2 other stories on the screen that are favorites on this channel, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. From all of us at Grandma Stories, remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no to the people who take advantage of your love. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly deserve your kindness.